welcome to Healthy for My Purpose. We are going to be talking about, some call it controversial, some call it matter of fact. We're going to be talking about alcohol, your health, and your faith. And we thought it was a really good topic because I think there's just so many views around alcohol, and it's a touchy issue.
Mhm.
I know they say don't talk about religion, money, but I almost say alcohol sometimes comes into that too. People are very touchy around that subject in the church, out of the church, and we just want to unpack it, have a conversation about it. Hopefully, it will give you some insights on how you want to go about alcohol in your own life. And so that's what we're going to dive into. So, Gigi, you wrote an article, and I think this is what kind of sparked this podcast. I thought it was a really good article on the whole issue around alcohol and your health. Because
Yeah.
we get so much mixed messages in the media, like alcohol is good for you. Alcohol, if you drink a glass of wine every day, your heart health. And there's just so many mixed messages. And you really wrote a very concise, clear article on the truth about alcohol in all of its aspects, just in the raw science without any distractions and stuff. So let's talk about it. What did you
Yeah.
write in that article? What do you want to start off with?
Yeah. I mean, so this article, I guess, had been brewing in the back of my head for a little while. And then, you know how sometimes the Holy Spirit just says, just go do something and you don't even think about it. You just kind of go and do it. And that's what happened that day when I wrote it. It just kind of,
Mm,
I just pulled it together. And it was, honestly, I had written articles in the past about alcohol, but this one I felt, really elaborated a little bit more and better.
mhm,
And I think the controversy around alcohol stems from people who drink versus
mm,
people who don't drink. And then
mhm.
people who don't drink oftentimes because they used to drink and they
Mm,
stopped drinking and they
yeah,
don't want to go back to where they were in that place.
right.
And people who maybe for religious reasons or maybe there was a family member in that struggled with alcohol, maybe was even abusive, so they're just kind of like they've sworn off alcohol
Hmm.
altogether.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so and then plus the stories in the Bible around alcohol, I think have also kind of added to a little bit of this kind of back and forth.
Hmm.
So alcohol, from in today's science, we know a lot more about alcohol. It's also when I was going through my nutrition studies, it was brought to my attention that alcohol is also called ethanol. I
Mm,
remember first learning about it as a macronutrient along with carbohydrates, protein, and fat, that it's its own separate macronutrient, even though it's not a nutrient because it's an
yeah.
empty calorie. But it's a basically an alcohol is called ethanol, at least the one that we ingest in the form of wine, beer, and liquor. So ethanol is actually a toxin.
Mm,
And more specifically, it has been classified as a class 1 carcinogen, which means it's cancer causing by
mm.
the International Agency for Research on Cancer. So it's up there with like tobacco, with asbestos, with radiation, with
Wow.
processed meats,
Wow.
which was added more recently. But alcohol has been considered a toxin for decades, cancer causing toxin, and it's well known, well established. So what
Mm,
happens when we,
wow.
yeah, I mean, so when we drink this stuff, it just kind of breaks down in our system. And what it does is it forms this substance, this very dangerous toxic substance called acetaldehyde. And that is really what creates the damage in our body.
Mm, yeah. Well, if you're saying that this has been something that's just been known, again, I think again the marketing and the packaging of alcohol in our time now has done a wonderful job to erase or whitewash that knowledge, because most people um would not even know that, would not know that it's on the level of, you're talking about asbestos and all these cancer causing um chemicals that we would never know that. So even beyond just, that, like I know you talked about in the article that even the damage that it does to our body, the reasons why people gravitate towards alcohol
Mm,
can be an issue sometimes in terms
yeah,
of, you know, yes, it's, why so many people are going to it, and what are the dangers around that? Like
yeah.
it's a feel good, it's a party lifter, it's a and that can
Mhm.
be a very dangerous line. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I kind of draw a little bit of a parallel to when we're facilitating our Healthy Christian Woman boot camp and we talk about using toxic food,
Yeah.
emotional eating, that it becomes addictive. I feel like alcohol is kind of, along the lines. I feel like if you have stressors in your life, emotional problems, that we tend to lean into something that's going to give us some temporary relief, whether it's that cheesecake or it's that bottle of wine. It gives us a temporary escape. And alcohol is a psychoactive substance, it's dependence producing. So, what that means is that it's a drug that actually affects your mind and
Mhm.
it's easy to get addicted to. I mean, that's why, you see these programs like Alcoholics Anonymous and these
Yeah.
substance abuse programs to help people get off, because it's not as easy when you've been drinking for a long time, chronically drinking. And it doesn't even have to be drinking, a 6-pack a day chronic drinking. It
Yeah.
could just be drinking 1 to 2 drinks a day, which is
Mhm.
kind of what the guidelines have historically said is a quote unquote safe amount to drink.
Right.
Up until last year, that changed. And so what happens is that, it's used as this temporary feel good escape from life stressors and whatever emotional problems that you're running into. And so when you drink regularly, it starts off as this temporary kind of feeling of this buzz or this little, you don't even have to be sloppy drunk. It's just this buzz, this, feeling good, and you're like enjoying it.
Yeah.
And as you drink and you continue, you almost get this feeling of inhibition. Some people will tend to be more chatty
Yeah.
when they drink. And some people, tend to feel more alert and more energized when they drink. Sometimes you'll see, or maybe you've been to,
Mhm.
like a football Super Bowl party or something, and people are
Yeah.
drinking, and then
Yeah.
everybody's jumping on the sofa.
Yeah.
Just, um,
Yeah.
but and then a lot of times for people, there's this term called liquid courage. Like when you drink,
Mhm.
and this goes back to reducing your inhibitions,
Mm.
where you just feel braver than you would when you're not drinking. And
Yes.
when you're in that buzzed kind of, even drunk state, it doesn't even have to be completely drunk or
Mhm.
fully drunk, that you get
Tipsy, is
this
that the word? The tipsy.
tipsy. Yeah, tipsy. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
it. That's a cute
that's
way
it.
of saying it, but
Yeah, yeah, but that's
yeah.
what it is. And it's interesting that you say that. I'm going to read from Ephesians 5 verse 18, and it says, don't destroy yourself by getting drunk, but let the Spirit fill your life. I think that
Mm,
kind of coincides, because what you're saying, or what I hear you saying, is that we could use alcohol to meet needs, whether it's like you said, whether it's I'm shy and I need to get myself up to something, or whether I'm going through problems or stress. But the Bible says, get away from alcohol, be filled with the Spirit, because
mm,
at the end of the day, the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, can help you address those issues. The Holy Spirit can give you the confidence to do something that maybe you're fearful of, or whatever the case may be. So that scripture kind of directly addresses this idea that there's a contrast between being drunk and being filled with the Spirit.
right.
Both are trying to do something. One is the correct way that's going to actually solve the problem, and the other way is just going to lead you to drunkenness, emptiness, and not really solving the problem.
Right, right. And actually leading to more
and
problems.
leading to more problems,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah,
So
yeah.
we can't even count. And I know drinking is not all about getting addicted. So we just want to put that out there. But the end of the road of what alcohol abuse can be is devastating.
Yeah,
Like the destruction of families and homes and marriages and children. It is, I mean, we could go into just the studies that they did on children that grew up in alcoholic homes and the side effects. And we don't even have to get into that. But one thing we know for sure is that alcohol can destroy lives if you go over into that deep end of it.
right, right.
Yeah.
And it could, and this is where the science is catching up.
Mm.
It can also destroy lives by way of promoting chronic illness like cancer, for example, which is
Wow.
very prevalent. Alcohol, and we can, link back to the podcast we did with Dr. Orman. But alcohol, even one glass a day every couple days, increases your risk of getting breast cancer. Because the thing about alcohol is that it is both water soluble and fat soluble, which means that it crosses into the blood-brain barrier like super quickly and goes into whatever cells it wants to go into.
Right.
And if you and so I certainly there's a dose dependent, kind of relationship, which we can get into, where, the more you drink, the greater you're at risk for, something like cancer. But there's, alcohol is people are becoming more aware that no drinking is really the best course of action. I mean, certainly if you're going to your sister's wedding and there's a champagne toast and that's the only time you drink, like once every 3 years, probably not a risk, or not it's very de minimis as far as the risk level goes. But I think what people don't realize is that even just drinking, having the drinks on Friday night and Saturday night, still creates risk for cancer.
Wow.
And the other thing about drinking, you have this euphoria we talked about, you're kind of coming up. So you're in that temporary state, kind of like when you're eating that cheesecake, that there's this crash, that happens when it starts to wear off. And usually the outcome of that is, feeling lousy, feeling tired, sometimes, feeling depressed or regretful that you were drinking, the night before. And so, there are consequences short term to drinking in addition to long term as far as, creating disease risk in your body.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that. And I think you said the World Health Organization actually came out and said there's no level that's safe. I
Yeah.
think I think that needs to be said loud and clear, because I think a lot of times when we have the conversation around health and alcohol, we are talking about somebody who's excessively drinking and they're off on the deep end, they're going to have a lot of kidney problems, cancer. But we don't talk much about, like you're talking about, that limited amount of every day, I'm just having a glass of wine, or maybe on the weekends. But that also has come out to say is not safe. And so we need to have the conversation, I think, with those people, because I know we're preaching to the choir when we talk about alcohol abuse and all of that. It's a given. Everybody agrees that's not good. But that little gray space of
Yeah.
drinking the glass of wine every day, the glass or two on the weekends, and all
Yeah.
of that, you're saying that the World Health Organization came out recently saying that no level of alcohol is safe. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit more about that, because I think that is where we kind of lose ourselves in, because we're like, well, I'm not drinking excessively, so I'm good.
Yeah, I'd like to just, if you don't mind, just
Yeah.
read the excerpt from
Yeah.
the article that they wrote, and then we can
Yeah.
attach it to the show notes of this
Yeah.
podcast. But it's under the header, risks start from the first drop. So risk of drinking alcohol starts from the first drop, it says. To identify a quote unquote safe level of alcohol consumption, valid scientific evidence would need to demonstrate that at and below a certain level, there is no risk of injury or illness associated with alcohol consumption. The new World Health Organization statement clarifies currently available evidence cannot indicate the existence of a threshold at which the carcinogenic effects of alcohol switch on or start to manifest in the human body. Moreover, there are no studies that would demonstrate that the potential benefits affect the benefit, to demonstrate that the potential beneficial effects of light and moderate drinking on cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes outweigh the cancer risk associated with these same levels of alcohol consumption for individual consumers. And this is a quote from Dr. Karina Fiera Borges, who's the acting unit lead for non-communicable disease management and the regional advisor for alcohol and illicit drugs in the World Health Organization. She says, we cannot talk about a so-called safe level of alcohol use. It doesn't matter how much you drink. The risk to the drinker's health starts from the first drop of any alcoholic beverage. The only thing that we could say for sure is that the more you drink, the more harmful it is. And she goes on. So, you know, it's pretty clear. I mean, she said it starts from the first drop, you know,
pretty serious.
and
Yeah.
so it just kind of, you know, it just kind of, and I think, you know, I think also the disservice around saying that 1 to 2 drinks is okay. Now, keep in mind, what I'm quoting here is guidance that, you know, I don't know, I got to go back and check, but I think it's the FDA or some guidelines for, you know, I don't know if it's the USDA, FDA, the guidelines for Americans, but we'll attach that as well. But basically what I was taught in school was that 1 glass of alcohol per day is acceptable for women and 2 for men, and it has a lot to do with your weight. So if you're a bigger person, you could drink more. If you were a smaller person, you would drink less.
Yeah.
And so they give you this illusion that it's okay to drink when, you know, it's not okay. It's not that cut and dry.
So let's get into some of the specifics, because we talked about the cancer. Obviously, you talked a lot about the breast cancer and so forth. Let's talk about how it affects your health. In the article, you talked about brain health, mental health, gut health, obesity, heart health, the ability to affect your sleep and your motor function. So you talked about a lot of different specific areas that alcohol actually affects. You want to chime in on some of those?
Yeah. So when we talk about brain health, you know, so again, this goes back to the regular low to moderate consumption, the 1 to 2 drinks per day scenario, which is, I think, where the majority of drinkers fall, is that it causes brain atrophy. And so it's basically a loss of neurons, or this term neurodegeneration. And there was a study that was published last year that supported that, because everyone has already known, you know, the heavy drinker scenario is, you know, damages the brain in that way, but nobody really looked at the moderate drinker. So there's definitely that dose response relationship. The more you drink, the more damage you do to your brain. Mental health. So, you know, mental health, as far as like anxiety and depression, alcohol is, you know, there's this like vicious cycle with alcohol, because sometimes people will drink because they have, you know, they're depressed about something in their life. They just went through a breakup in life, or they got fired from a job, or something happened that, you know, became, you know, a stressor in life. And so you kind of reach for that alcohol to kind of calm your nerves. Well, what happens is that, you know, the chemical effect of drinking alcohol basically contributes to the anxiety and can contribute to the depression. So it becomes like this vicious cycle where it's, you know, it's basically, you know, they feed each other. You know, the alcohol feeds the anxiety and depression, and the anxiety and depression feed the alcohol. So it just kind of goes back and forth. When we talk about gut health, It does absolutely affect the microbiome. It does kill, it's been shown to basically kill the good bacteria or the probiotics in your gut. So it's also been linked to digestive issues like leaky gut. So this is where the gut lining is damaged.
Yeah.
And that causes more, intestinal permeability that, invites more toxins into your body. Or, things like inflammatory bowel disease, like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. So there's a link there. With respect to obesity, we kind of talked about the empty calories. There's 7 calories per gram in alcohol and ethanol. And so, we know that fat contains about 9 calories per gram, which is, also when you consume too much fat, it can lead to weight gain. And so in this case, what we're talking about as far as obesity, there's a few things that are happening because there is an association with alcohol consumption and visceral fat or abdominal fat. And so you've heard of like the beer belly, for example. So this is where, obviously I don't know if it's obvious, but when you have, excessive abdominal fat and you have that apple shape where you're, bigger in the middle and little skinny legs, it's more dangerously, metabolically than if you had a, more weight in your booty and thighs. So if you had the pear shape, it's less dangerous metabolically than having that apple shape. The other thing that has been shown is that alcohol leads to craving more salty and greasy foods. And this is why, sports bars, supply that. They supply both the alcohol and the greasy food. So the deep fried onion rings, French fries, the loaded, cheeseburgers and all of that. And so, certainly that's going to contribute to weight gain and obesity. And then I would say the other thing is that, with the heart health piece, it's a known contributor to things like high blood pressure in terms of making it worse, in terms of, just heart disease in general. But I think what people have tried to make the case for is red wine is good for your heart. And really, it's not so much the red wine, it's the grapes, right? It's the resveratrol, which is it's an antioxidant, anti-inflammatory. So you can get the resveratrol just by eating the red grape and not necessarily drinking the red wine. So
Yeah, that's a really good point. Just eat the grapes, right?
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
go ahead.
I think you mentioned, and we were talking about like sleep and stuff, sleep and
Yeah.
motor function. I think that, with sleep, the issue with sleep is that drinking, so you might say, oh, I need a drink to go to sleep. Well, yeah, it does act as a sedative at first. But the problem is that as it gets metabolized in your body, it converts from acetaldehyde to acetic acid, and that affects your REM sleep, your rapid eye movement sleep. And so what's wrong with that? So people who drink may notice that, okay, I have no problem falling asleep, but then I wake up and then I can't go back to sleep. And, or even if you are able to go back to sleep, the quality of your sleep is reduced. So you might be putting in 7 or 8 hours of sleep, but the quality of that sleep is not restorative. And so because it affects your rapid eye movement, sleep, that then in turn, affects your learning ability, your memory, and your mood, which goes back to the anxiety and depression that we talked about.
Yeah, so it seems like it's a vicious cycle. They're also interconnected, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the last way, because we talked about cancer, as far as it also, we talk about breast cancer, but there's esophageal cancer, stomach cancer, colon cancer, cancer of the bowel. But also it impairs your motor function. So we know about obviously like drunk driving, being a contributor to alcohol related deaths and injuries. But also things like falling, tripping and falling and hitting your head on something, or, even just because of the inhibition of it, it could lead to things like fist fights, and it does, when you hear about people going out to the bar and then someone got up in somebody else's face and punched them, and that could then lead down a whole nother road of going to jail and everything. So there's just a lot of, things around alcohol that are more dangerous than I think people really realize or don't want to accept, because they're really using that as that emotional crutch that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so I know directly there's, a lot of people scripturally would say, well, there's absolutely no place that says do not drink in the Bible. I know most of the scriptures, in Proverbs, I'll list them in the show notes, talk about this idea about getting drunk and being a fool and making bad decisions. And there's this whole essence around drinking to get drunk, which I think is the underlying, because I think when somebody drinks to get drunk, I think there's already a precursor going into that, which is what you talked about, which is whether it's a problem or frustration. And so you kind of go into it, why you would even escalate it. So I think they kind of marry each other there. And so as someone who's a Christian, I think now that we've I think really looking for the scripture that says do not drink at all may not be the right question. Mm-hmm. But I think after listening to this and, all the aspects of where alcohol could lead, a better question would be, how, is it pure enough to be in my body as my temple? Back to the being healthy for your purpose and what you put in your body and what you put into your mouth. So if you're saying, cigarettes are bad, junk food is bad, you have to kind of put alcohol through that lens, because now we realize that it's not just an ethical thing of whether I drink or I don't drink, but alcohol is loaded with side effects, emotionally, physically, and even spiritually, because like I said, we're using it sometimes what the spirit should be doing. And so I think the right question is more like, is alcohol right for my temple? Not whether or not it says in the Bible, should I do it or should I not? Because we lose the real decision making around it when we make it a black and white conversation. Well, it's not in the Bible, so that means I could drink it. Well, hold up a minute. There's a lot of things that aren't in the Bible, but we have to filter it through, is it healthy? Is it safe? What would Jesus do today? And here's a controversial question for you, Gigi. I don't know if you have the answer, just off the cuff. Is the alcohol different in modern times than you would say centuries ago? Would Jesus be drinking the same wine? Is it the exact same thing? Or is there more layers to the type of alcohol that we have available today? Or what's the stance on that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say, I would say yes and no. Yes, in the sense that, it's different because it's not, it wasn't mass produced back then. There's probably some more additives that are added to the alcohol, like the wine that you're buying to keep it, preserved and whatnot. But I would say it's not, because, it happens, it occurs because there's fermentation. So the fermentation of, the grape, if you will, becomes, alcohol. And then when it gets to a certain level, so people were drinking and getting drunk back then, which we know, from Noah's days, it goes way back, that it's not different, in the sense that it still metabolizes in the human body, through the liver to create this acetaldehyde, that is the toxic substance that then goes on to create, that changes your DNA. It literally changes your DNA and doesn't discriminate where in the body it's going to do that. And that's why it's linked to so many different types of cancer. It's not like drinking is only associated with esophageal cancer because it goes down your throat. It's also associated with breast cancer, with colon cancer, with stomach cancer. Yes, it's mostly in the digestive tract, but it is also with, like I mentioned, the breast cancer. So I would say no, it's not really that different as far as the DNA changes it can do to your body. But I don't necessarily think, because I've heard people say, well, Jesus drank
At the
wine.
wedding. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if, and this is where it's the dose response relationship. If you're chronically drinking every weekend or once a day, even if it's just one drink, that's vastly different than someone going
To a wedding.
a friend's wedding who just got married once and they had wine there and then that was it,
Yeah. And here's the other caveat too, because every place, or the majority of times that you see, besides the miracle when Jesus turned the water into wine, wine was actually used in a miraculous way. But most of everywhere else where you're seeing alcohol, it's someone getting drunk and getting into a lot of trouble. And the scriptures reflect that. But I think here's another thing that I think changes our modern times is the accessibility. Like for you to go to a wedding, back in Jesus' time, and you're going to a wedding and you're traveling how many miles, and you have that wedding, you may not go to another one for so many years or months or whatever. But for us, we have alcohol on our fingertips. Like you could go to the corner store, you can go to the grocery store, everywhere, anywhere. You could order it online. You never have to leave the house. You could put it in the, I don't know if you put it in the Instacart. Let me verify that. But you could literally get alcohol anywhere, any place, anytime. And so it's far more alluring for us. It's marketed to us on the television and at the games and at social events and parties and concerts and and so, and here we talk, and we could talk about this after, but I mean, the other part is the communion, but a lot of churches just do grape juice. So we're not really bringing the wine in that perspective, but it's seen as very intentional at a wedding. Now churches, we can do communion, which is just grape juice. It's not really alcohol. But the point is, it's situational,
right?
Not the overconsumption culture that we're in with alcohol that you could just buy it at your fingertips.
Right. And it does go back to the intention around drinking, because the chronic, I'm going to just drink on the weekends when I'm done with work because I'm stressed out and it seems very innocent, but over time, especially if you've got some other comorbidity issues, like you have obesity, and, I'm talking to the ladies out there listening, that is another risk factor for cancer, breast cancer, is obesity, alcohol consumption, and then certainly, eating a diet that's, high in cancer causing substances, like meats and grilled meats and processed meats and that sort of thing. So, it's and how you're using it as that emotional crutch. But I'll tell you, I'm saying all this, but I have a history of drinking alcohol. And so my personal story around alcohol actually started at an early age. I think my parents, and they told me why they did it. Well, my dad, he would let me sip his brandy. He would be sitting in his favorite chair, smoking a cigarette, drinking his cognac or his brandy. And I would come up, sit on his lap, and he would let me sip it, just like taste it. And then we would, I would say maybe in junior high or even high school, go to this Mexican restaurant. It was our favorite little Mexican restaurant. And my mom would order a margarita and she'd let me sip her margarita. And, from their standpoint, they were just like, well, you're going to try it at some point anyway. You might as well get introduced to it so you know how to behave yourself, when you're in a social setting. That was their logic. And this was back in the, 70s. So it's a totally different environment today. I think if they tried to do that, they'd be in jail. But so what happened was that drinking went from, doing it at, before legal drinking age, even in high school, we would go to certain places and get beer, from people who would sell it to underage drinkers. And then it went into college. And then, after graduating, it was just everywhere. We would go out for happy hour, or I was working as a trust officer when I first graduated from college and at a bank. And we would take clients out, high net worth clients out. It'd be myself and either the, portfolio manager or somebody else, or their lawyer, and we would go out to lunch, not every day, but we would go out to lunch, and I would, we would have like a cocktail, like a martini or a glass of wine. I mean, we weren't getting drunk, but you would drink enough to get a little chilled, like you would feel it. And of course, the rest of the afternoon was like useless. I wasn't productive at all. And it wasn't all the time. It just happened a few times in that scenario. But, as I continued in my career, moving out of financial services into manufacturing, it didn't change. It was just, it looked different. We would have, leadership meetings or training or whatever it was. And it would be like that evening, we'd all go out to dinner, and alcohol was always very present at those events. So it was kind of regular. And so, I would say that, and then I would say that also led to when I ran into stresses like at work or things that were disappointments in my life, that I would use alcohol as kind of like what we were talking about earlier, as a way to deal with life stresses. Oh, I had a bad day, I'm going to have some wine, And so I found myself in a place, and this was actually before I changed my whole diet in 2012, but I would say I was drinking at my heaviest right before I changed my diet. And that then led to me kind of changing my alcohol habit. Not that I quit drinking, but I significantly reduced it because I had other things that were more important in my life, like cycling and that sort of thing, and running. But it was, I think at its worst, I was probably drinking the equivalent of maybe 10 to 12, drinks a week. And so after that period, and I kind of started on a new path, it went down quite a bit. I think I'd been averaging about 4 to 6 a week. And I would say in 2020, something shifted, and it was around the time you and I got together when I started feeling God nudging me to quit drinking. And the way it showed up was regret in the morning, or just this nagging feeling like, why am I doing this? Like, and it was just out of habit, I'd just been doing it so long. And I wasn't, I was never someone who was like getting hammered. It was just more social. I would go to the brewery with Kevin, and on Wednesdays, and I would have, a beer and a half, because they do like half pints. And then it was just kind of like, I just started feeling, it was kind of like, I was reading, I think it was in Revelation. I forgot what chapter it was. I think it's Revelation chapter 3, the one where Jesus is knocking on the door, and it was kind of like, I realized now that he had been knocking on the door in 2020, but I was like, nobody's home.
Yeah.
I wasn't answering the door. And then in November, after I closed my studio, I just decided to quit drinking. And I had done it with a friend of mine who was kind of in the same place as me. And so we just decided we would stop drinking, and I was like, cool, let's do it. And so
that's awesome.
I never looked back. So it's been, about 6 months now. And so I finally answered the door.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, now I'm looking back, and it's like when I changed my diet, it was kind of the same thing. It was like, man, I really wish I would have done that sooner. I wish I would have done it back in 2020 because
Yeah.
I didn't know it was gonna have such a, I mean, I kind of knew it, but I didn't know to the degree that it would
Yeah.
have such a physical benefit on my overall body. Like and just my overall health. I just know
Yeah.
it's right. You know, like I
Yeah.
feel right. I feel one with God in the world now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny you say that. And I think, for me growing up, I remember way, way back, maybe my dad used to have like a Guinness. This was way back when I was very small. And then when my dad became a Christian, I don't even think I've ever seen my mother drink before, ever. I don't
Uh-huh.
think I've ever seen her drink, but I remember him when I was small, he would have something like a Guinness or something to that effect. And then after he became a Christian, this is like in your child's mind seeing this. I've never seen him drink. So maybe from the time I was about maybe 7 or 6, I never really saw him drink. So I never really had a culture of drinking like in our family. So by the time I went off to university and stuff like that, I was always the person that I was a taster. Like I'd be like, oh, let me taste that. Let me see. And then I'd be like, oh, this is horrible. And then sometimes I would drink it, and then I would just keep doing that. And then at one point in my life, I don't know if that was God or what, but it was just like, why are you forcing yourself to taste or to drink this thing and you don't even like the taste of it? Like and I went to a wine testing. This was years ago. And as soon as I drank the wine, I got a headache. This was
Yeah.
the red wine. And then I realized that there was something in it that they said certain people get headaches with certain. And so there was always a catch with me. Either I would get a headache, I would feel so sleepy right away just from the taste
Yeah.
but I kept going on and trying this. Let me try this. Let me just taste yours. So I wasn't necessarily a drinker until one day I just had to say, why are you just don't drink? Because first, number one, it doesn't even agree with you. And then now with everything that it doesn't even make sense. So that's kind of like my little journey of drinking.
Yeah.
Is more so it just never agreed with me. But again, in social context and somebody else had it, I would be like, oh, let me taste that. Or I would buy something and never drink it and waste it. So I was that type of trying to fit in more culturally, or saying, oh, this is the right thing to do, or everybody's having a wine with the meal, it's supposed to be the thing. But then I would sip it and be like, oh, I have a headache. Oh, and then I'd end up wasting it. So for me, I had to realize that alcohol could also be a social pressure in
Mm-hmm.
social settings, and being able to, it's kind of like when you change your diet, being able to stand against the social setting even when you know it doesn't serve you. So I
Yeah.
knew it didn't serve me, but I would be in a social setting and be like, oh, okay, I'll pair that with that, and I would just get it for the heck of it, not realizing now I'm just like, it doesn't serve me, I don't even like the taste anyway, and it gives me a headache and whatever
Yeah.
else, so I just don't even bother. So
Yeah.
it's funny how it's just how it's what you see, how you're grown up with it. There's so many different factors when you go to college. Even when I went to college, there was a lot of drinking going on. But again, I never really got into it because number one, there was this idea that I'd never seen my parents drink. So there was this idea that maybe you shouldn't drink. And then there was this other side of people, well, there's nothing wrong, so I'll just taste. And so that for me, that was my evolution of dealing with it. But either way, down to the same road, just forget about it and
Yeah.
and just, because and I didn't even, honestly, I really didn't understand how toxic it was. I really thought alcohol was like, okay, if you just do a little bit, it's fine. But the more I'm learning about this is the more now I'm just like, yeah, it's not even worth it at all. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say the other thing that's different today than back in, Jesus's time, we are exposed to so many other toxins, just environmental toxins that harm us. You just don't need another toxin on top of that, especially if it's a toxin we're choosing to put in our body. There's a lot of toxins we're not choosing to put in our body, that we just get exposed to. Just because of the modern times and lack of environmental regulations and laws and that kind of thing. I'm not trying to get political, but I'm just saying that when companies are putting out into the environment certain chemicals and toxins, and you're just driving through the area and you might be ingesting them and not knowing, that wasn't the case back in Jesus's day. They didn't have those kind of environmental toxins and issues that we have today that we have to be concerned about. I mean, even as simple, and this is going off the rails a little bit, but just humor me. But even things like air fresheners, for example, you have these household air fresheners, or you go into a store, or you go into even like a medical facility, and there are these things that are supposedly good to sanitize the air, whatever. Well, some of these things do have chemicals in them.
Oh yeah, that's not going off the rails. You're absolutely right, because what the skincare, the makeup, the
Yeah,
shampoos, the just the toxin in the air, depending on what part of the country you live in, forest fires and this and
yeah,
that, or a plant that you're living close to, we are
yeah,
bombarded by toxins. And so that is why, if you could minimize, like you're saying, what you have control over,
right,
that's
right,
what you can do, because you really are living in a toxic world. There is no 100% you're living in a bubble, but
yeah,
you can control the best of your ability, the food, the
yeah,
drinking, the smoking, those things you have control to choose.
yeah, yeah. I'll tell you just real quick. I did a bike ride in the Delta in Mississippi. There's a real popular bike ride called Bikes, Blues, and Bayous. It's a great ride. But I remember riding past this field of crops when the crop duster was coming through and spraying pesticides over the crops right in my air flow. Like, here I am breathing hard because we're going really fast on the bike, and I'm just ingesting these chemicals that are just being sprayed over the crops. And I remember thinking to myself, if I ever find out I have lung cancer, I know it's probably from
Wow,
doing this
from that,
right.
wow, I'm telling you. And that's
So,
going on the food. So there's
yeah,
just so many
yeah,
layers to
exactly,
that, you know what I mean? And
exactly.
so yeah, so we have to just do the best that we can.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's you listed so many health um issues that come up with alcohol, but here's another spin to using alcohol. It's the cost. Like, I
Mm.
know so many people, I shouldn't say so many people, but I know people that when they add up that bill at the end of that month, that alcohol is big. Like, it's a
Mhm.
big amount of funds that are spent. Because remember, if you're somebody that drinks wine every day, and especially if you enjoy expensive wines and alcohols, that adds up on the pocket.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, the average cost for a bottle of wine, just a basic bottle, is around $15. But people who drink and really love their wine, they don't bat an eye at spending, upwards of 25, 30, even more on a bottle of wine. And if you think about beer, for a 6 pack, it's between, around $7 to $14, depending on whether it's one of those, macro mainstream beers or a craft beer, and also depending on where you live. And then, when you're talking about liquor, you're talking anywhere from $30 to $50, for a 750 milliliter bottle on average. Certainly if you're getting a top shelf vodka or tequila or rum or whatever, you could spend upwards of $80 on a bottle of liquor. And that's just if you buy it yourself. When you go to restaurants, depending on where you go, a martini can easily cost, $15, like just one drink, one martini, or one glass of wine. And so you're absolutely right. It adds up. It's like you're spending money to poison yourself. And it just seems kind of counterintuitive. And I never looked at it that way until I quit drinking. And it kind of goes back to what we started talking about, this debate around alcohol. But when someone, and maybe we need to add this when we're talking about the Healthy Christian Woman Boot Camp, because it's like the cost of 2 martinis, is the cost of our boot camp. But it's just, it is a big impact on the pocketbook, just directly, just the direct cost of alcohol does impact our finances.
I think in the end of it all, I think the message um, is asking yourself the right questions around alcohol.
Yeah.
Not, not whether you can find it in the Bible, but more so, does it serve your body? Does it serve your health? And if you can't break away, it's kind of like we talk about the addiction to food. If you find that even after I know all the facts and I know what I can do, and I said to myself, you know what, this is not for me, and you find that you cannot break away from alcohol, then it's time for you to either get help or get support to do that, because now there might be a deeper layer that you might not be addressing. So it's for everyone to kind of assess for themselves. Try to say to yourself, I'm not going to drink for another 2 months. And if you struggle with that to the
Mhm.
point where you cannot function, then you might want to say, you know what, I need to figure out a way to get support so that I can pull away from it, because that's something deeper. Because a lot of times we don't want to say, like, we'll be like, oh no, it's no big deal, it's just a drink. But ask somebody to give it up for a month and they struggle. And that is the red flag to say, well, you know what,
Yeah.
maybe I need to step back, maybe I need to get support, and maybe I need to figure this out on a deeper level.
Yeah.